Hi everyone, this week we're going to talk about unit testing, and not at all an unfamiliar aspect, but one that, well, I've noticed it causes a little bit of confusion, so I thought I'd take a few minutes and clear that up. So let's get started. That's right, we're going to talk about expect versus verify. Now, you really can't run any unit tests without either one of those, so you might be wondering, well, we see these all the time, isn't this a bit redundant to talk about it? Not particularly. I've seen a few points of confusion and wanted to clarify, how do you use them the right way? So let's get started with our first friend here, expect. Expect, we only ever use it with real-world objects. So what do I mean by that? So let's say that you have a UUT, and you want to call that function and get some sort of result back. Well, that's a real object because you're getting an actual response back from that function call. Now, you can expect on that result and say, I expect it to equal this, or a certain property on that object to equal that. That is a perfectly valid use case because you're working with your UUT and you're getting an actual result back. That's a real object. Now, with mocks, this is totally different. I would never say expect a certain property on a mock to equal this. It's not going to happen because mocks behave totally differently. They are packaged up in a very different manner. You can never use expect with mocks because those values aren't getting set. They're getting recorded. We'll get to that here in a minute about recording. Now, the last thing is we never use this with method calls. We wouldn't expect a method to be called because, again, it's a whole thing about recording. Expect doesn't actually make sure that a value was recorded as such. It is used to basically be an equals. Does this value equal that? So let's take a look at an example of what a correct expect value looks like. This first example is what you would see pretty much anywhere. So you can see I have a result from some sort of call that happened earlier, and I'm checking a particular property on that object, and I say to equal, and then some sort of thing. And this compiles, it passes, it works perfectly. I actually pulled it from our code. Now the reason why this works is if you take a look back up a little bit more, we take a look, we see we actually are setting a variable called result. It's a real object that's coming out of our UUT, so it's actually getting set inside of our test. If I scroll up a little bit farther, you could see, well, result is actually a locally defined variable inside my test. Perfectly valid use case to use with the result here. Perfect. Let's take a look at an incorrect example. Now, this one's close, but it actually will never fail because expect doesn't really know what to do with this. We're not saying expect the thing inside this function call to be true or false or something like that. We need to be able to use the construct that I showed you earlier. So even if I said result.subject is equal to fourscore and 7 years ago, for example, that's actually going to pass. Mostly because it really has no idea that it's a test. So that's why you need to use those constructs I showed you earlier. This should never actually show up in our test at all. Here's another example that's incorrect. Now this one may look a little bit weird, but if you've done verifies, which we'll talk about here in a minute, this is the standard syntax that you use for a verify. Does not work for a result. Again, you have to use that first construct that I showed you earlier. Expect something to equal that or something to not equal that, that sort of thing. Again, this is actually not even going to compile. I kind of got rid of the squiggles just to kind of make a point here. This won't compile. The one that I showed you example before, this one here, this will compile, but it's not going to pass or fail. Next, let's talk about verify. Verify is only ever used for mocks. So unlike expect, where you can actually make sure that a value is being held by a particular variable, verify doesn't do that at all. It actually makes sure that a property or a function call was recorded. And anytime you say the word recorded, you know that means I'm referring to a mock. So this is only ever used for mocks. It does not verify that a property holds something. So I can never say, like, get a result back from a particular function call and a local variable and say verify that the result is equal to this. Not going to work. Again, because what I'm referring to is not a mock. So that's a pretty easy delineation here. Expect works with real objects, verify works with mocks. That's pretty much the dividing line. Now here is an example of a correct usage of the verify function. Now notice I'm calling the function outside of the verify call. So you can see verify is just wrapping that object. And then outside of that is the actual function call. So I don't put the function call inside of verify. I'm not saying the thing in between these parentheses are what I need to verify. It's basically saying for this object on the inside, make sure on the outside that this thing happened. So that applies to both method calls as well as this example here where I'm making sure that a property is set. See the difference here? So expect, I would say expect something to equal that. Well, here I'm actually using the equals operator here, and I'm saying the exact same thing here. So I'm saying outside of the verify, make sure that this property was set. It's no different whether it's a property or a function call, same thing. Now, let's take a look at a few examples where verify is being used incorrectly. I've already talked about this one earlier. You can see how the entire function call is being included inside of the parentheses inside of verify. So the entire thing is wrapped by the word verify. That's not going to work. Even though it compiles, this test isn't valid. We need to take that function call outside of the verify function, or that property call outside of the verify function, in order for it to work. So if we take a look at this next example, same thing is wrong here as it was in the previous example. So we know how to fix that. Some of the examples that I showed you today were more of just mental exercises. So really, if you put them in an IDE, they wouldn't compile. So it's a no-brainer. Obviously, you wouldn't be using those techniques. But some of them would, especially around expect. And that's where it gets a little bit dangerous, because obviously you're expecting that these tests will pass or fail, but they won't always, because you didn't use the proper construct. So now that you know the difference between verify and expect, and the differences between each of those constructs, hopefully that'll be more helpful whenever you go to write your unit tests. Thanks for listening. Catch you next week.